And a lot of people look at the most outlandish cases where it's the drag queen story hour, or the Desmond is Amazing child drag queens, or they'll look at little children being put on HRT, being put on cross-sex, hormone therapy, whatever, and they'll say, well, of course that's wrong. This is terrible. This is a godless society, something like that. But they're completely ignoring how we got here. How did we get here? How did we get to a point where it would be acceptable for all these extreme expressions of degeneracy to manifest in our society in legitimate places like a police headquarters? How did we get here? It didn't start this way. It didn't start this way that, it went from Christian, puritanical, waspy society to the next day, child drag queens. It started with the gay tolerance and gay acceptance. And it has snowballed ever since from, I don't know how you could track this, maybe from Ellen DeGeneres, I would say, to Glee, and then maybe Lady Gaga and, Britney Spears. But in other words, it took 25 to 30 years of what most people would say is reasonable, what most people would say is tolerable changes to the social fabric. Gay acceptance, gay marriage, this kind of thing. And only after 25 years of that do you arrive at this. What is the conclusion? It all has to go. Everything must go. What is the answer? How are we going to fix it? Everything must go. Not just the 7-year-old being put on cross-sex, hormone therapy, not just the child drag queen, not just the drag queen story hour, not just, the gang-banging transgender police chief, but the whole thing, but all of it, it all has to be put back. You cannot turn back the clock 5 years and press pause. It does not work like that. You don't get to live in this happy middle ground where you get to have a just, virtuous society, in other words, the afterglow, the fruits of a Christian virtuous civilization, but also have, and not even like that's valuable, by the way, but also have this peace of mind with this liberal onslaught that we're being tolerant and everybody can express themselves. One side must win. It is a zero-sum game. Are we going to live in a virtuous society, or are we going to live in a degenerate society? You do not get and what I mean by the middle ground is not like the best of both worlds. Obviously, one world is the good world and one world is hell. What I mean by the middle is you do not get the luxury of not taking any moral responsibility for the society. That's what I mean by that. You do not get to sit there and say, well, I don't have a problem with it. Who am I to judge? Whatever people do behind closed doors is fine with me. Because something like that actually requires moral conviction. A lot of people think it's wrong to pass judgment. A lot of people think it's wrong to take a stand on moral issues about other people's lives. It's not. This is how we get there. Because you notice all the people in this area, all the people in hell world, are eager to take a moral stand. They're eager to adjudicate what happens in other people's lives. Are the LGBT advocates, are the degenerates, are the left-wing activists, are they really passive and shy about telling people what is right and what they should do in their own homes? Or are they very aggressive, very in your face? Do they infiltrate and use the force of the state and other institutions to exercise and exert their will on the rest of the country? We can only defeat them if we have the same mindset. We can only beat them back if we have the same courage of our convictions, if we're willing to do the same things they are. But we're not. We're only willing to take it all the way as far as it can go and then cynically shake our heads and say, yeah, that's crazy. That's a shame. After 25 or 30 years of this shit, then we turn on the news and say, drag queen story hour. What will they think of next? This is crazy, because people are cowards, because we do not have the balls that the opposition does, So I see this drag queen thing. I see all these things, and that's really the moral of the story. And we're about to get into that with James Young, is you have to oppose it at all levels. It's wrong that you have a transgender police person. It's wrong that transgenderism is tolerated. It shouldn't be. This goes with the territory. As I was saying earlier, and I was about to take in this direction, these people are not like us. These people are not like us. I don't believe that a person is born a woman in a man's body. I don't believe a man is born in a woman's body. I think people are born and maybe they're mentally ill sometimes, or something environmentally happens to them along the way, developmentally, in their early childhood. But it is the acceptance of this kind of deviancy and degeneracy that gets us to this place. It is no surprise to anybody that knows the relevant facts that a transgender police sergeant, whatever, maybe it's not something horrible like a murder or a rape or something, but that they would be sharing, they would be proud of their sexual exploits, getting gangbanged by 4 different people. That's disgusting. That's gross. And it surprises nobody that this is the person that's doing this, because these people are not just like you and me, but they're just a little bit different. They're just like you and me, but they've just got this problem where they were born in the wrong body, or like with gay people, they're just like you and me, but just like I like hamburgers or somebody likes hot dogs, they have another preference. It's not the same. It's not the same. It is a deviation from the norm. And once you deviate, you get all kinds of other deviations. Once you oppose nature, you oppose God. That's the real slippery slope. That's where these things present themselves. And so it's things like this that must be condemned outright, axiomatically. And that's before we get to this point. That should have happened before we got to this point, But people see the ultimate expression of it. People see it get this far, and now everybody's got a problem with it. Well, I have bad news for you. Maybe it's bad news, maybe it's good news, but if you have a problem with this kind of thing, if you have a problem with what I'm about to talk about, we're going to need people to take a little step further, be a little open-minded in the other direction about where this stuff originated. And this is something that conservatives, I think, across the board should take up as the cause. Aside from the obvious moral conviction, which is that this is wrong, everybody involved should get the death penalty. I'm not saying they should be murdered. I'm saying they should get the death penalty. I'm saying they should be put on trial for child abuse, and maybe the penalty for something like that should be the death penalty. But aside from that, which I think we all agree about, I think this has to be put a stop to in the broader society, because you're going to see a lot more of this. And this has to be the crusade. Forget about low taxes. Forget about businesses. To look at this through a political lens, why are none of our political leaders talking about this? Why are they not running the story 24/7 in conservative media? Why are Republican congresspeople not talking about this? Why is this not the issue that we are pressing across the board? I don't understand. What it is about, what is it about the conservative movement that we see this kind of thing and it's like, oh yeah, shrug, that's no big deal, whatever. That's something that, if anything, when they address it, they say that it's extremists that are latching onto this. Have you ever seen that? Whenever a story like this happens and we get pissed off online, the most we can expect from the media or from conservatives is extremists are, what do they say? They're capitalizing on this. They're pouncing on this. They're pouncing on this to spread their message, whatever. Why is this not a front page story? Why is this not the crusade? Because this is fundamentally the transformation that's happening to the country. It goes back to what I've been saying for weeks. A lot of people want to make this upcoming election, or they want to make the broader situation in the country about taxes. They want to make it about economic systems. What does Trump say about 2020? America will never be a socialist country. The Democrats want to make us like Venezuela. The Democrats want to take away your private insurance. What kind is that for a rallying cry? That's not the transformation that's happening to the country. This is the transformation that's happening to the country. This is the kind of thing that's happening to us. And this is what the Democrats unequivocally support. If you watch the CNN town hall on, LGBT rights or whatever a couple of weeks ago, just about every candidate on the stage paid lip service to things like this. They had a 9-year-old transgender. This is a 7-year-old transgender child in this case. But in the Democratic debate, the Democratic town hall, they had a 9-year-old transgender child asking questions. Elizabeth Warren, the front runner, fielded a question from a 9-year-old transgender and said, what a great question. You're amazing. And I'm going to help children like you in schools transition and so on. So why are we not forcing this as the issue? To me, I see this battle happening in the country, and I don't see this as a battle between socialists and capitalists, or even fundamentally Democrats and Republicans, people that are in favor of tyranny or freedom. It really, none of that matters. It all comes down to fundamental questions like this, which is, do you protect children? Do you protect the lives, the integrity, the virtue of children. Whether it's abortion, whether it's the drag queen stuff, whether it's, all kinds of other perversions that are being pushed on kids, drugs, crime, and things like this. The chemical castration of children. What is your position on something like this? There is no question more fundamental than this. It's a question of good versus evil. And why is nobody talking about it? I see, and actually Matt Walsh was tweeting about this. I hate Matt Walsh. I think he's a Shabbos goy. I continue to think that. I think he's a race traitor. I think he's a faggot. I've never shied away from saying these things about him. I think he's the worst, right? But it's people like him and a few others, this ragtag bunch of Twitter influencers that have put this in the mainstream. If it were not for people like super chatting my show, I wouldn't have heard about this. If it were not for, like I said, a handful of influencers, Ashley St. Clair was a part of it, Matt Walsh, a few others, putting out this hashtag, Protect James Younger on Twitter, this would have been silenced, totally suppressed. Nobody else is reporting on this. As I said at the top of the show, it's a few local sources, it's LifeZet, and it's the Examiner. And so, partially, of course, the story is about, broadly speaking, what's happening in the country. Partially it's about, as I was talking about with the DC transgender police officer, it's about the nature of evil and how it creeps up on you, how it's a slippery slope. You tolerate a little bit of it, and gradually it becomes larger, and then you get a lot of it, and then you get this. As I said with the transgender police officer, it does not start like this. It was not like puritanical society yesterday, and all of a sudden you have a court order that a father has to watch his son be chemically castrated and call him a girl's name. It didn't start like this. It got this way eventually because people got lazy, they were irresponsible, they were tolerant of evil. And what do you think happens? The devil takes an inch. You give the devil an inch, he takes a mile. We started out with Ellen DeGeneres. We started out with Glee. We started out with gay marriage. How's that going to affect you? It's not my business what happens in other people's lives. It starts out, frankly, with even minor things that preceded that. I think you could go back to birth control and abortion in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. If you boil down marriage, if you deconstruct marriage so that it's only about sex, if sex is something trivial and frivolous and not a matter of grave moral interest, well, then maybe that in some ways paves the way for homosexual acceptance and other hedonism, other degeneracy. So, really the way to think about this is to look inwardly, first of all, and say, what was my part in creating the society that produced this? Because we are all complicit. Maybe some more than others, but this is all of our society. We all bear responsibility. Look inwardly and say, what have we done to deliver something like this? This is a society that we've created for ourselves. In some ways, this is the society that we deserve. That's not what the child deserves, but this is the society that we've created. So in the first place, you have to look at something like this where everybody can agree is despicable, is evil, is wrong. The people involved should be put to death for it, legitimately at the hands of the state, not vigilantism. I'm not calling for violence, but I am saying that the people doing this should be held accountable, and I think there should be serious accountability, right? But certainly, I think we don't arrive at this from nowhere. I think we all bear responsibility. So that's number one. Number two, and I think we all agree that this is evil. I think everybody agrees this is terrible and so on. But number two is, why then is this not our issue? Why then is this not the crusade? As I said, everybody wants to make this next election, everybody wants to make the struggle about things that are easy. They want to abdicate all moral responsibility or abdicate any kind of risk, frankly, of being fired or being called out or called the name, right? Or being targeted by the left-wing mob or whatever. In other words, it's very easy to say, no, I'm the Republican that just likes low taxes. It's a lot easier to say that than it is to say, I'm the Republican that wants pedophiles to get shot. I'm the kind of Republican that wants people that abuse children to be given the death penalty. I'm the kind of conservative that says we don't need any more non-white people from third world countries. We have enough as it is. Frankly, we've got too many. In other words, it's a lot easier to abdicate all responsibility and therefore all risk for actually having moral conviction about what's happening than it is to say, oh, I'm somebody that simply cares about dollars and cents. I only care about your pocketbook. We could all get around that, right? More money in your paycheck. So I'm wondering why we don't see more of this, and why don't we see any more of this from Republicans? I think we all know the answer. The people that are running the Republican Party, The people that are running the conservative movement, I've said it before, are Jews, atheists, and homosexuals themselves. Take a look across the conservative movement. Who have we talked about in the last so many weeks? Brad Palumbo, Guy Benson. How many people can we point out in this conservative movement who are sympathetic, I'm sure, to things like this, right? And beyond that, take a look across the board at who's running the think tanks, who's running all the major donor groups and everything. You've got basically two categories, atheists and Jews. Is it any wonder then that the so-called conservative party, the so-called conservative movement, doesn't actually care about Christian values, isn't actually moral? Because, I don't know if you've ever looked at the Talmud or anything, but Jewish values, atheist values, of course, are not exactly close or similar to Christian values. So I think we take a look at something like this, and as I said, it's a watershed moment for the country. This is a test. How this resolves itself, I think, will determine our fate for the next generation. If something like this is stopped, we've bought ourselves time. If something like this, because we have done everything to stop this, demonstrations, protests, political people getting involved, who knows, maybe extra legal things. I don't want to get into detail, right? But if something like this, if the society rises up and says stop, this cannot be allowed to happen. This is wrong. This is not the country we want to live in. If that happens, I would say I'm a little bit more optimistic. I would say we've bought ourselves some time. We are not ready to arrive there yet. But if this is allowed to go through, if this boy gets chemically castrated after it's been raised to somewhat of a national character, a national spotlight, something like this, if this has been raised up to be such a prominent issue, and it's relatively prominent now, I think, after the events of today, they got the hashtag going and so on. If this is ignored by the media, if this is buried, if it's allowed to go on, I think we will have really crossed the Rubicon. If things like this become accepted and normalized, I think it's really too far gone. And if that happens without a fight, say goodbye, right? And this is when I say to a lot of people, this is where you really have to get the courage to actually do something about what's happening here. It's just James Younger, and it's just Kate Steinle, and it's just Molly Tibbetts, when it's somebody else's son, somebody else's daughter, somebody else's father, mother, whatever. It's very easy to say that's something happening out there, not my responsibility. I can afford to be apathetic when it's somebody in Texas, somebody in Iowa, somebody that you don't know. But don't you understand that it's going to come for everybody? Don't you understand that this is the new country that we're all going to have to live in? And that maybe it's only a matter of time before it's your son being chemically castrated, your son being killed by an illegal immigrant, your daughter getting beat to death and raped by one of these animals. Do you understand what I'm saying? And so a lot of people look at the situation and they'll say, they agree with me. They'll say behind closed doors, it's like they say about the Soviet Union. They'll go in their house, lock the doors, close the blinds, turn up the radio, jump under the bed, put a pillow over their face and say, we don't want this to happen. This is terrible, whatever. People say behind closed doors that they agree with me. They don't like this stuff. But nobody will act. Nobody will do anything. Because, of course, the cost is so high. Because if you speak out, if you do anything, well, of course, you'll get targeted by the mob. But don't you understand that the cost of not doing anything is so much higher? Don't you see that by now? Don't you see that for innocent people, thousands, perhaps millions of innocent people, millions of unborn people, what the consequences will be if we do nothing? Doesn't anybody understand that very simple calculation? Sure, if you go out and you say some of the controversial things like I say, it's going to carry a very high cost. And I don't mean to sugarcoat that. I don't mean to minimize that. It's not been easy for me, believe me, to do what I'm doing and say the things I'm saying. But understand that the cost of doing nothing is so much astronomically higher than to get fired from your job, than, to get ridiculed, ostracized by your friends. We're talking about the country descending into, not the country, the world, into 1,000 years, possibly much longer, of darkness. Morally, certainly, there's a racial connotation as well. That's what awaits us if we do nothing. And so I see things like this, and I think everybody can look at a story like this, and right away they know this is wrong, and they understand the gravity of something like this. Children, I think more than anything else, is the litmus test. Are you moral or are you immoral? Are you a good person or are you a piece of shit who belongs in hell, right? You see something like this, I think every person who's right on the money would say, yeah, by any means necessary, this has to be resisted, right? This is the watershed moment. This is the Rubicon moment. I hope that it's averted. I hope that we're able to resolve this through peaceful means, but you know what? I think maybe some rules can be broken here. I would say in this rare case, it's a rare case, but I would say in this case, rules can be broken. I hope this can be resolved with demonstrations and protests. They say that they're planning on getting people to show up at the next court hearing or something like this. They're trying to get people to demonstrate outside the courtroom, and they're trying to raise awareness, spreading the hashtag, and they're donating to the Father's Legal Fund and all this. But I hope it can be resolved that way, that we'll get a happy ending. But something like this is so unacceptable that we cannot allow our country to become this simply because the courts say it must be so. Do you understand what I'm getting at? I don't think it's something that I would just take that, oh, well, the courts say that this kid has to be chemically castrated. Well, we tried. That's what the court said. That's what the law says. This is what the police will enforce. Yep. I guess we just have to let this happen. There are rare moments when this happens that we have to say, I don't really care what the law says. I don't really care what the police say. I don't really care what the courts say. Who are we as people if we let that stand in the way of justice? It's not like we're talking about something that's very abstract or conceptual or in the grand scheme of things maybe trivial or marginal. I mean, we're talking about something that's pretty grave. This is a human life which has no business being squandered like this. It's ridiculous, Imagine being born, you're 7 years old, and just by the luck of the draw, you've got some insane mother who's going to, destroy your genitals, destroy your body, destroy your brain, because, she's psycho-femoid, right? It's totally wrong. So I hope it's resolved. I hope we achieve a positive outcome. But, this is one of these things that I think we have to go all out on. I think this is one of the ones that we really have to push the envelope here, because I don't know about you, but I don't want to live in a country where that's going on. If a government says that a father must watch his son be chemically castrated and call him a girl's name, I want no part of that. That government is illegitimate in my eyes. And you know what? This is a kind of cause that I think a lot of people would feel similarly about. I think a lot of boomers, I think a lot of Gen X, I think a lot of kids, frankly, a lot of Zoomers, millennials, I think a lot of people would see this and feel the exact same way. But, prayers, funds, demonstrations. If you're in Texas, look into that, see what the information is. I don't have it all right in front of me, but this is something that I think really has to be put to a stop, or else I don't think there's any turning back. And Republicans got to make this an issue. I hope and pray that Donald Trump sees this and says something, because understand, if Republicans ran, and this is so ancillary to what we're talking about, but in terms of a political lens, if Republicans took this kind of thing and ran with it, if they made 2020 about drag queen kids and transgender kids and this kind of thing, we would win easily. Because, maybe people are on board with Elizabeth Warren and, the big banks paying their fair share and whatever. Maybe people are on board with Medicare for all, but they're not on board with this. That I can tell you. I don't believe we're there yet. So I think that should be reflected in some of the campaign stuff. But that's this case with James Younger. It's just really tragic to see, femoid question, transgender question, legal. I mean, there's a lot of things happening here, right? But we're going to take a look at our super chats. We'll see what all you guys have to say about this. Honestly, and really, the more you think about it, the more you realize how cut and dry it actually is. People want to pretend, oh, everything is so complicated. It's such a moral gray area. There's really no moral gray area. Not at all. Do you want a society that leads to this, or do you want a society that doesn't? It's that simple. Well, with LGBT, it's such a moral gray area because there's nothing gray about it, folks. What's in the Bible? What's in the catechism, right? It's that simple, okay? Do you have a society that leads to transgender police officers getting gangbanged and showing it to teenagers, and you have transgender kids being put on hormone therapy, or do you not? It's that simple, right? And really what it comes down to is children. Across the board, and this is the pattern I've noticed, they want to kill children. There's no evidence that is stronger than the way children are treated by this regime. Abortion, transgender, drugs, crime, technology to some extent. There's no such. I'm having so much trouble phrasing this. There's no better evidence. There it is. There's no better evidence that what we're dealing with here is the devil. What we're dealing with here is evil, a regime that is controlled by the devil, than the way children are being treated. That's what it is. If you think it's about, the left is about egalitarianism or whatever, the left is killing babies. The left is killing and raping and abusing babies. That's all you need to know. They're aborting them. They're putting on these chemical treatments. They're getting them hooked on drugs. They're brainwashing them. They're ripping them from the arms of their mothers. What do you think divorce is all about? What do you think adoption is all about? Gay adoption, things like this. It's all about harming children. How can anybody be a part of that, How can anybody think it's ambiguous at that point? How can anybody not feel strongly about it? Well, I don't really pay attention to politics. There's a genocide of babies going on and you don't really care? And the ones that aren't being genocided are being, abused in countless ways, as I just outlined. But this has been going on. This is the country we live in. It has to be put to a stop. We have to protect the babies. Have to protect the babies. What did Jesus Christ say? What did he say about people? They're going to, put their hands on the young ones. I think we all know. But we're going to take a look at the Super Chats, as I said.